Healing begins where denial ends. Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow in a world where every mirror tells the truth. Not just the truth about your appearance, but the truth about your thoughts, your fears, your addictions, your wounds. No filters, no defenses. Just you staring into a flawless reflection of your own psyche. And here's the catch. You can't look away. You try to move, distract yourself, reach for your phone, scroll into oblivion. But the mirror follows you. Every reflection on the bus window, in your coffee spoon, in your lover's eyes shows the same unfiltered image of your soul, anxious, angry, ashamed, maybe even numb. The truth you've spent your whole life avoiding is now following you, whispering in a voice that sounds eerily like your own. What would you do? Would you finally sit down and look it in the eye? Or would you scream, smash the glass, and cling to the comforting lie that you're fine? This is the paradox. Everyone wants to heal, but no one wants to be honest. We cry out for peace, for purpose, for clarity, but only if it doesn't require exposing the rot we've sealed beneath years of denial. We say we want change, but what we really want is a painless miracle, a transformation that doesn't ask us to bleed. But healing, real healing, is a violent unraveling. It doesn't politely knock. It crashes in like a storm and rips apart everything you thought you were. It forces you to face truths you buried under careers, relationships, substances, spirituality, productivity, anything to avoid the terrifying stillness where the truth waits. And this is where the world has gone blind. We glorify progress while repressing pain. We preach about growth but avoid grief like a plague. We label sadness as dysfunction, anger as immaturity, addiction as weakness. We've built a civilization of coping mechanisms masquerading as culture. And yet deep down, you know something is off, that no amount of therapy speak, morning routines, green smoothies, or self-care rituals can touch the core of your suffering, that the ache in your chest, the one that comes in quiet moments, when no one's watching, is not just stress or burnout. It's something older, deeper, more sacred, something asking, begging to be seen. But the first law of survival in this world is denial. Denial of emotion, denial of death, denial of responsibility, denial of the soul. Because to acknowledge the truth would threaten everything. It would mean admitting that your career is killing you, that your relationship is a trauma bond, that your identity is a collage of defense mechanisms, that your beliefs are inherited lies, that your normal is a trauma response. Who would you be then? And yet, paradoxically, that moment, the one you fear most, is the doorway to your liberation. Because the truth is this: healing is not something you do, it's something you allow. It happens the moment you stop running, the moment you stop pretending, the moment you say, yes, I am in pain. Yes, I am lost. Yes, I've been lying to myself. And that admission, that simple, brutal honesty, is where everything changes. But here's the problem. Most people never get there. Not because they can't, but because they won't. Because denial is easier than death. And make no mistake, healing requires death. The death of illusions, the death of ego, the death of who you thought you had to be in order to survive. So the question becomes, how long will you lie to yourself to avoid the pain that can set you free? How many versions of yourself will you create just to stay safe? How much life will you sacrifice just to avoid being seen by yourself? What if the part of you you're hiding from is the very thing that holds the key to your healing? What if the wound isn't the enemy but the door? And what if everything you've called healing so far has just been another form of running? The answer to those questions is not just intellectual, it's existential. It lives in your bones. It breathes beneath your habits. It whispers in the silence between distractions. And the moment you stop running, the moment you stop denying, that's where the real story begins. Denial is not simply a choice. It's an inheritance. It begins before you even have words. As a child, your nervous system learns the rules of love and danger not through logic, but through experience. If showing sadness leads to punishment or withdrawal, your body decides, Sadness is unsafe. If expressing anger gets you shamed, you tuck it away deep, silent, fossilized. You don't forget those feelings. You bury them, layer by layer, year after year. And eventually, you forget that you buried them at all. This is the hidden problem. Denial becomes identity. It isn't that we lie to ourselves on purpose. It's that we become the lie. We shape our entire personalities around what the world demanded of us to survive. And we call it normal. We call it me. Carl Jung said it best: people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Why? Because the soul doesn't play by society's rules. It doesn't care about your status, your job title, your polished image. The soul is the raw, undistorted core of who you are, and it often contradicts everything the world has taught you to be. So we build castles of denial, emotional walls, psychological routines. I'm fine. It's not that bad. That was a long time ago. But underneath those layers, the truth festers. We don't just deny pain, we deny the self that experienced it. Nietzsche, in his razor-sharp clarity, understood this psychological violence. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he warned of the last man, the one who has traded vitality for comfort, who avoids suffering so fairly that he loses the capacity for greatness. Nietzsche wasn't glorifying pain for its own sake. He was exposing the cowardice that grows when we refuse to confront it. Denial, to him, was spiritual decay. And then there's Gabor Mate, who brings the lens of modern trauma psychology to the same conclusion. His work reveals that most addictions, compulsions, even autoimmune disorders are not flaws but adaptations. They are ingenious, tragic strategies the body and mind create to survive overwhelming emotional realities. Mate writes, the question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. But in a world built on denial, we rarely ask. Instead, we pathologize the symptom and ignore the wound. Why are you always anxious? Maybe it's not a chemical imbalance. Maybe it's your soul streaming from a cage of perfectionism. Why can't you stop working, striving, achieving? Maybe it's not ambition. It's the denial of worthlessness you felt when you were 6. Why do you sabotage intimacy? Maybe it's not fear of love, it's the armor forged around a broken heart that was never allowed to cry. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that suffering was not an interruption of life but its essence. He saw life as a battleground of desires, where peace comes not from fulfillment, but from liberation from illusion. Denial, in this view, is the root of illusion. It promises escape from suffering, but only deepens it. And society rewards this denial. Look around. We are praised for being emotionally detached, for keeping it together, for not making others uncomfortable with our truth. The more numb you are, the more functional you appear. Numbness becomes success. Productivity becomes virtue. The body is ignored, the emotions anesthetized, the soul forgotten. We don't ask children what hurts. We ask them what they want to be when they grow up. We don't ask adults what they long for. We ask them what they do for a living. And so we raise generations who don't know themselves, only the roles they've rehearsed. Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear for the world. But behind the mask is the shadow. Every unexpressed emotion, every buried truth, every part of you that was denied the right to exist. The more you deny the shadow, the more power it gains. You begin to sabotage relationships that feel too honest. You get physically ill with no apparent cause. You erupt in rage over minor triggers. You feel hollow in moments that should be joyful. These are not failures. They are the soul's protests against a life built on denial. Sartre, the existentialist, pushed the idea even further. To him, denial wasn't just a psychological habit, it was bad faith. It was living a lie and calling it freedom. He believed that true authenticity meant staring into the void and saying, I choose to be awake, not comfortable, not socially approved, but awake. Yet to wake up, you must first see that you are asleep. The tragedy is that most people don't know they're in denial because the world has designed distractions for every step of the journey. Feeling lonely, scroll. feeling insecure. By feeling numb, watch something. Feeling sad, smile and pretend you're grateful. Every discomfort has a cure except the truth. And so we are left with a world of beautiful, broken people who have mastered survival and forgotten how to live. But what if denial isn't just a protective mechanism? What if it's a doorway? What if everything you've hidden, your grief, your rage, your unmet needs, isn't a weakness to be avoided, but a message to be heard? This is the terrifying and liberating truth. The parts of you you've denied the longest are the ones that hold the blueprint for your healing, not because they are comfortable, but because they are real. And nothing can heal without first being made real. But that's the thing about truth. It doesn't arrive with flowers. It doesn't whisper sweet nothings. It arrives like a fire. It burns away everything false. And what remains is you. The question is, can you bear to meet yourself? Because if you can, you'll discover something profound. Healing doesn't begin with a solution. It begins with surrender. There is a cost to denial, and it's not just emotional. It's existential. You don't simply push down the truth and walk away unscathed. You fracture, quietly, invisibly, layer by layer. You become divided, one self for the world, another hidden in the shadows. One self says, "I'm doing great." The other whispers, "I'm dying," in silence. And this fracture becomes the blueprint for your entire life. You wonder why nothing feels real. Why your relationships seem hollow. Why you always feel like an imposter, even in your own skin. It's because you're not living, you're performing. You've split yourself into parts, and now you no longer remember which one is actually you. This is the unseen consequence of denial. You lose your ability to feel reality. Cognitive dissonance becomes your default. Your nervous system, trained for years to avoid pain, no longer trusts peace. Stillness makes you anxious. Intimacy feels dangerous. Joy feels suspicious. You wait for the crash, the betrayal, the pain, because that's the only world your body understands. Psychologists call this learned emotional suppression. But what it really is self-abandonment. And it doesn't stay small, it bleeds. You overwork not to achieve, but to prove you're worthy. You pursue love not for connection, but to fill a void that has no bottom. You chase goals, followers, applause not for joy, but for silence, the kind of silence that comes when your demons are temporarily distracted by external validation. But the silence never lasts, does it? Because the wound is still there, and touched and seen. And the more you deny it, the more you create a world around you that reflects the denial. This is not just a personal issue, it's cultural. Entire systems are built on this fracture. We create workplaces that reward burnout and call it ambition. We design schools that measure performance but ignore emotional intelligence. We manufacture media that numbs rather than nourishes. We celebrate hustle culture, grind set, and no days off, not realizing we are applauding symptoms of unresolved trauma. Modern society is, in many ways, a machine that converts unprocessed pain into productivity. But it comes at a cost, because denial metastasizes. In the body, it becomes chronic illness, autoimmune disease, fatigue without cause. In the mind, it becomes depression, anxiety, dissociation. In the heart, it becomes emotional numbness. You can't cry, you can't laugh, you can't feel anything deeply. You become a ghost in your own life. Neuroscience confirms this. When you suppress emotion, your brain doesn't delete it, it redirects it. It builds neural shortcuts around the pain, like a city routing traffic around a collapsed bridge. But the bridge is still broken, and the detours get longer. And soon, you forget where you were even trying to go. You lose your internal compass. This is why so many people feel lost, not because they lack direction, but because they've silenced the voice inside that once pointed the way. And this is where the paradox deepens. The more disconnected from your pain you become, the more disconnected from your purpose you feel. Because pain, when acknowledged, is not just a wound, it's a message, a guide, a compass pointing toward the part of you that is begging to come back to life. But denial deafens you to the call. We often think of pain as the enemy, but what if the real danger is numbness? Because the numb don't revolt, the numb don't seek truth, the numb don't heal, and society loves the numb. The numb obey. They buy more, they compete more, they stay quiet, they keep scrolling. This is the deeper consequence of denial. It makes you easy to control. A person who feels deeply is powerful. A person who cries when something hurts, who rages at injustice, who grieves what's lost, that person is dangerous to a system built on silence, which is why you've been taught that emotion is weakness. Men are taught not to cry. Women are told not to be too much. Children are told to be good. Employees are told to be professional. All subtle cues with one message. Don't feel too deeply. Don't question too much. Don't listen to yourself. But what happens to a person who listens only to what they're told, and never to what they feel? They forget how to hear their soul. And here lies the quiet tragedy. Most people never notice the moment they stop being fully alive. It doesn't come with a bang. It comes in slow, subtle steps. A choice not to speak up, a smile when you wanted to scream, a day spent chasing goals you don't even believe in anymore, a life that looks successful and feels empty. This is what Nietzsche called nihilism in disguise, the death of meaning beneath the surface of normality, a quiet apocalypse happening behind your smile, and it continues until something breaks, a crisis, a breakdown. A loss so profound that denial finally fails, and for a moment brief, terrifying, you see yourself, raw and masked, and you realize how long it's been since you've actually been here. That moment, though it may feel like the end, is the first real beginning, because in that moment, you're no longer a ghost. You're present, you're in pain, yes, but you're alive. And now the mirror is back, but this time, you don't look away. This is where the turning point comes, when the cost of denial becomes greater than the fear of the truth, when your body, mind, and soul collectively whisper, enough, and from that whisper, something ancient begins to stir, something deeper than fear, deeper than trauma, something that has waited patiently, silently, beneath all the roles and masks, your true self. But to meet it, you'll have to rebel against everything you were taught to be. Rebellion doesn't always look like fire and fists. Sometimes it looks like a quiet moment of refusal. The refusal to lie to yourself one more day. The refusal to perform one more smile. The refusal to pretend one more time. It begins as a tremor, a crack in the mask, a voice you haven't heard in years whispering, "This isn't who I am." And for the first time, you don't shut it down. You listen. This is the beginning of rebellion, not against the world, but against the false self you've become. And it is the most radical act of freedom you will ever undertake, because to break free from denial is to commit heresy in the church of conformity. It is to choose wholeness over approval, truth over comfort, healing over image, and you will be tempted to turn back. Every cell in your body has been wired to protect the lie. Every survival instinct will scream, "Don't look at that, don't feel that, don't go there." Your denial isn't just mental, it's somatic. It lives in your shoulders, your gut, your breath, your posture. You'll feel it like gravity trying to pull you back into numbness. But rebellion means learning to sit in the fire of discomfort without reaching for the exit. Gabor Mate says, "The attempt to escape from pain is what creates more pain. The only way out is through, not around, not above, through." So, how do you move through? You begin with honesty, brutal, compassionate honesty. You name what you've denied. I feel alone. I don't know who I am. I've been pretending my whole life. These truths won't destroy you. They'll reveal you. Beneath the fear is the freedom to finally meet yourself. And in that meeting, you will find not just brokenness, but brilliance. Not just wounds, but wisdom, because everything you denied about yourself is part of you. It's yours to reclaim. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole. Not perfect, not happy all the time. Whole, That means integrating your light and your shadow. It means owning your anger, your sadness, your fear, and discovering the power they hold when acknowledged instead of repressed. The anger that was once destructive becomes a boundary. The sadness that once drowned you becomes a guide. The fear that once paralyzed you becomes a signal. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is not positive vibes only. This is emotional alchemy, the transmutation of denied pain into conscious power. And no one can do it for you. Healing is not a performance. It's not aesthetic. It's not what you post on social media. It's what you do in the dark, when the world isn't watching, when your old patterns rise up, and you choose, again and again, not to run. You breathe, you feel, you stay, and slowly the body begins to trust. The nervous system uncoils. The trauma loosens its grip. The truth, once feared, becomes a homecoming. But rebellion also means facing the world differently. It means risking rejection. It means saying, no, I won't play this role anymore. It means losing relationships that only loved your mask and finding those who can hold your truth. It means creating a new language, one built on vulnerability instead of performance, depth instead of decoration, presence instead of perfection. And yes, it's terrifying, but look at history. Every great transformation began with someone who refused to stay asleep. Nietzsche, rejected in his time, wrote for the future for those brave enough to question the herd. Sartre defied societal morality to champion individual freedom, even if it meant existential dread. Jung dove into madness to understand the psyche. Dostoevsky wrote through prison pain and epilepsy to explore the soul's darkest corners and found beauty there. These men were not safe. They were not comfortable. They were not well adjusted to the world. They were awake, and so can you be. But it starts with a shift, not in your environment, but in your gaze. You stop looking outside for answers. You turn inward. You enter the cave you've avoided your whole life, the one filled with grief, rage, unmet need, and unspoken truth. And you realize you're not there to slay a monster. You're there to rescue the parts of yourself you left behind. The inner child who was silenced, the teenager who was shamed, the adult who learned to numb. They're all still there, waiting, not for judgment, but for your embrace. This is what Jung meant when he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. To rebel is to remember. Remember your body, how it used to feel before you tightened it to survive. Remember your voice, before you learned to speak in apologies and pleasantries. Remember your soul, before you were taught it was impractical. This rebellion is not loud, but it is seismic. You begin to build a life that reflects truth, not trauma. A life that honors complexity, that allows contradiction, that embraces the messiness of being fully human. You don't need to be perfect to be free. You need to be honest. And with that honesty comes sovereignty, the right to decide who you are, what you feel, what you need, and how you heal. But don't mistake this for a destination. Healing is not a place you arrive. It's a path you choose daily, with every choice to feel instead of flee, to speak instead of smile falsely, to stay instead of self-destruct. Each moment of truth is a quiet revolution, and these small revolutions, repeated over time, become something unstoppable. They become the life you were always meant to live, not the one you were conditioned to accept. So ask yourself now, what part of you have you denied for too long? And are you ready to welcome it home? Because the war within ends not when you win, but when you stop fighting yourself. And from that truce, a new self emerges, one that was never broken, only buried. What if healing isn't about becoming someone new, but remembering someone ancient? Imagine this. You've stripped away the lies, the performances, the coping mechanisms. The masks have cracked. The roles have dissolved. The noise has quieted. You're standing naked before yourself, not the self curated for others, but the self that has always been watching, waiting, and in that stillness, you don't find a monster, you find someone sacred, a soul that never needed to be fixed, only found. This is the ultimate truth. You were never broken. You were only buried beneath your denial. The healing was never about perfection. It was about presence. And now, in this fragile, radical moment of honesty, you are present, fully, painfully, beautifully, here. You're not healed because everything is easy. You're healed because you've stopped running. You've stopped abandoning yourself when you feel too much. You've stopped shrinking when the world demands a version of you that feels safe, digestible, small. You've started showing up for the grief, for the joy, for the ambiguity, for the unknown, for you. Comma. And this is power, not the kind of power that conquers, the kind that integrates, the kind that sits in the ruins and says, even here, I belong. Because healing doesn't promise certainty, it promises truth. And the truth is, you are not one thing. You are not just the trauma or the triumph. You are not just the victim or the warrior. You are a constellation of contradictions and still whole. Carl Jung called this the union of opposites, the moment when the ego no longer fights the shadow, but invites it to the table, when light and dark no longer compete, but complete one another. And in that union, something transcendent happens. You meet the self beneath the self that watched you survive the worst without turning cold, the self that whispered, even in the silence, I'm still here, I'm not leaving. That part of you, the one that refused to die in the numbness, is not just a survivor, it's a guide. And now you understand, the very things you once thought disqualified you from love, from peace, from purpose, are the things that made you ready for it. You thought your shame made you weak, but it made you humble. You thought your fear made you broken, but it made you wise. You thought your rage made you unlovable, but it made you honest. And your grief, that old ache you tried so hard to silence, it made you real. This is what no one tells you. Healing doesn't turn you into an angel. It turns you into a human being fully alive, fiercely awake, unafraid to feel everything. Even now, especially now, because now you see the world with different eyes. You no longer confuse performance with presence. You no longer seek approval where there is no love. You no longer beg for crumbs when you know you are bread. You walk differently, not because you're healed beyond harm, but because you no longer betray yourself to be accepted. You speak differently, not because your voice is louder, but because it's yours. You love differently, not because you've mastered relationships, but because you no longer abandon yourself for the illusion of connection. And perhaps most importantly, you hurt differently. You no longer fear pain as proof of failure. You welcome it as a teacher, a portal, a reminder that you are alive, awake, and on sacred ground. This is what healing really looks like. Not linear, not clean, not always visible, but sacred. It's in the breath you take before reacting, the silence you honor before speaking, the moment you say, I don't need to fix this, I just need to feel it. That is the revolution. And from here, life doesn't get easier, but it gets more honest. You stop needing to control everything. You stop demanding guarantees. You start trusting that what's real can never be lost, that your worth was never up for debate, that your story, with all its darkness and detours, was never a mistake. And as this realization settles into your bones, something unexpected rises. Gratitude. Gratitude for the breakdown that cracked the mask. Gratitude for the years you spent in exile because they taught you how to come home. Gratitude for the pain that once felt like a curse because it became the compass. And now you understand, healing begins where denial ends, not because denial is wrong, but because truth is sacred. Denial was the wall, but truth is the door. You had the key all along. And now, with hands still shaking and heart still healing, you open it. You step through. You don't know what lies ahead, but you know this. You're not walking as a ghost anymore. You're not surviving as a shadow. You're living as the full, fierce, flawed, and holy version of yourself. And that is what you were always meant to be. So breathe. Stand in this moment. Feel the weight of what you've shed and the freedom of what you've found. You are not lost. You are returning, and the path forward is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget. Welcome home.